morning, children. Today we're going to be doing African history. This is our Explore Africa series. And guess what we're going to be learning about today? Anybody know?
Yeah. Country!
Ancient Egypt! Woohoo!
And is that Queen?
We're going to be learning about ancient Egypt today. So let's get going. We're going to learn introduction, objectives, a general history, timeline, and conclusion. So for our introduction, ancient Egypt is a civilization that lasted over 3,000 years, right? And in terms of other civilization, it's longer than any other civilization imaginable, okay? So how long did the ancient Egyptian civilization last for?
3,300.
Over 3,000 years, okay? People in ancient Egypt could only survive when the Nile flooded and then it caused mud to form on the banks, because most of that area is actually desert. So once the Nile flooded and it produced this rich mud, they were able to fertilize their soil. So that was how, people in ancient Egypt survived. And also, another famous thing, a beautiful thing about ancient Egypt is these pyramids. Have you heard of pyramids before?
Yes.
So these pyramids are massive.
Gold-getters.
Yes, they're massive structures that the ancient Egyptians built. And guess what? They didn't build it with modern technology. They used really simple tools, but they worked really, really hard with these modern tools. Okay?
Too.
So our objective, so at the end of this session on ancient Egyptian history, what I'm hoping is that number one, you're going to be able to learn how people of ancient Egypt lived, right? And have an idea of what their society was like. That's the first objective. The second objective is that you will begin to understand how the river Nile plays such a pivotal role in the survival and the development of ancient Egypt. And then number three, you're going to see the legacies that the ancient Egyptians have left. Like they contributed to math, they contributed to medicine, they contributed to writing, they contributed to even paper. Do you know where the word paper comes from? Papyrus, okay? So we're going to learn all these things, how wonderful ancient Egyptian civilization was.
Did you say papyrus?
Papyrus. It's a paper that's made from a specific plant.
Books about?
All right.
I don't learning about countries.
So first things first. Can you see the pyramids?
Yes.
Can you see the kings?
That's the pyramid that
Yes.
gold-getters.
Yes. So the first point that we're going to learn about is that the Egypt was ruled by dynasties, which meant it was ruled by people of the same family, okay? And it was known as a dynastic period. Whenever Egypt was ruled by a dynasty, it was known as a dynastic period. And this happened up until 1 BC. That is the first year of the first century, 1 BC. Because when you're measuring BC, you measure it from the largest number down till you get to 0. And then when you're measuring AD, it's from 1 to the highest number. So currently we're in the period of AD. So that's why our number of years keeps growing. So next year is going to be 2024. Yeah, 2024 AD. So the second point we see is that Lower Egypt in the north was richer. It was the richer kingdom. And it could trade with lands that were in the Mediterranean. So anybody have an idea of what lands were in the Mediterranean? Yes, and also like the Arab world as well.
Persia.
That will be
Mesopotamia.
exactly. So you find that it was not a surprise that the ancient Egyptians were very good at building ships, because they would use the Nile as a transportation route to buy products, sell products, and that sort of thing. Next, we see that Upper Egypt in the south, it had a smaller strip of land really, and the rest of it was dry desert. And oftentimes, Upper Egypt would get into battles, would get into fights with its neighbours who are known as the Nubians. Sometimes they would have peace, they'll be friendly with each other and they will trade amongst each other, and other times there will be war where they'd be fighting amongst each other.
What?
And the kings, like I said, of Egypt sometimes traded with the Nubians. As already mentioned, the Nile River was very, very important to the ancient Egyptians because this was, the best way that they could farm. Because like I said, the Nile River overflooded, and every time it overflooded, it released this mud that was a rich soil, and this meant that the ancient Egyptians could then farm. So they would plant things like wheat, they would plant things like barley, they would plant things like flax and papyrus. Again, the Nile River was also a commercial hub for the ancient Egyptians because, like I said, that was their main transportation route. So they would build ships, and on those ships, they would, travel to other parts of the world and trade and buy stuff. And this was good commerce for the ancient Egyptians. So, interesting fact. The most famous pharaoh from ancient Egypt is a guy known as Tutankhamun. But you can also call him King Tut. And he was a boy king, and he became pharaoh at the age of 9. And when he died...
That's young.
Very young. Very, very young. So he was just like a little bit older than you, but he became king.
But he was older than him.
But guess what? When he died, they buried lots of treasures in his tomb. There was even a gold mask in his tomb. Another fact about Egypt that's so well known is a sphinx. Now, that is a sphinx. Can you see?
Yeah.
So what you see is that it's got a head of a
head.
human being, and this is the head of a pharaoh, but
And
its
then-
body is like a lion. So this whole body is like a lion.
But it doesn't
Okay.
have like legs as a lion.
Yes, it does. The legs.
The legs are here. The legs are somewhere there. You can't see it very well in this diagram.
Oh.
But this sphinx is still
I
in
can see it.
Egypt
It's
today.
right there.
Guess
It's
what,
right
guys?
there.
So if we were to go to Egypt today, you would see the sphinx, right? It's still there till today because the structure that these ancient Egyptians made have lasted for such a long, long time.
So when they created it, it lasted for a long, long time.
Very, very correct.
And now is it like very old?
It's very old. It's thousands of years old. It's thousands of years old. But they built it so well that it has lasted thousands and thousands of years. Nowadays, there are not a lot of structures that last that long because guess what? When they build skyscrapers, after a certain amount of time, they knock some of them down and rebuild. So when we look at present times, we're going to ask ourselves the question, what structures are we building that's going to last thousands of years? What structures are we building that's going to last thousands of years? I don't know if we have any. So now we're going to look at a timeline. So basically a timeline is the years of activity that happened in ancient Egypt that are just noteworthy, okay? So the first thing is, in 2000 BC, we see that the Middle Kingdom was a time in ancient Egypt when things became stable and the kingdom grew bigger. So ancient Egypt became bigger and bigger and bigger. And because of this, people in ancient Egypt built all these massive pyramids. Pyramids, can anybody see what a pyramid looks like?
Yeah.
Right? And
It's a triangle.
they built this big pyramid at a place called Hawara, and one of them was made for a king known as Amenemhat the third. Yes. And then 1500 BC, some people from a place called Hyksos took control of the northern part of the Nile River, leading to the second intermediate periods. And then during that same time, we see that Queen Hatshepsut begins her reign, and she was known for building a lot of projects, and she conducted a lot of trade as well. And then in that same period as well, they built a temple for Amun in a place called Karnak. 800 BC, we see that people from Libya ruled over some parts of Egypt. And in the city of Suez, which was in the Nile Delta, it became a very important city in ancient Egypt. Then 700 BC, Egypt's 25th dynasty begins. And then Taharqa of the 25th dynasty rules over both the upper and the lower Egypt. And in 500 BC, the 26th dynasty begins under Psamtik I, marking a period of Egyptian resurgence. So that means the Egyptians took over again. And then we see that the building of the temple of Horus begins at Edfu. And then the Persian king Cambyses II took control, which marked the beginning of Persian invasion. So that means that the Persians came and they took control of Egypt. So we can see that throughout the years, we can see that Egypt was invaded by various people and they took over and they started ruling. So now we're going to look at the legacy of the ancient Egyptians. Like I said, there's so many things that the ancient Egyptians have done. Now the first thing is, ancient Egyptians were the first people in medicine, right? Because they had so many things that were detailed, so many things that were put into documents, and archaeologists have found so many records of treatments that the ancient Egyptians carried out. And what they even found that was really, really fascinating was that the Egyptians' understanding of the cardiovascular system was very sophisticated and very accurate. And who knows what the cardiovascular system is? No, it's to do with the heart. Cardiovascular, okay? So that means that the ancient Egyptians understood how the heart works, and they understood it really, really well. 2, mummification. Anybody knows about mummies? Basically, mummification is the ancient Egyptians believed that people could live forever, and in wanting to get people to live forever, what they did was they didn't want the bodies to decay, decompose, because when a person dies, there's no more oxygen flowing, there's no more blood, so the body starts to rot, it starts to decay, it starts to decompose. So the ancient Egyptians came up with this technique of preserving the body. So that's why when archaeologists found a lot of the pharaohs in their tombs, some of them still had flesh on their body, right? That was because of this technique called mummification, okay? And the interesting thing is that when ancient Egyptians mummified a pharaoh, they took out all the parts. So they took out all the organs, and they would put organs in different jars and different containers, and they would cover it with water and with oil. But the heart, they did not touch the heart, because they felt like this was this was the most important part of the body. In writing, so the ancient Egyptians are attributed to giving us the ability to write, because they made a lot of important advancements when it comes to writing. And the technique of writing that they do is called hieroglyphs. Basically, it's a combination of symbols and images to communicate a principle, communicate an idea, or communicate a message. So it's interesting that many historians today are able to look at those hieroglyphs and kind of tell us what the ancient Egyptians, were thinking of during that period that they wrote it. Another thing that we have to give the ancient Egyptians credit for are buildings. As we can see, the pyramid is one of the most famous buildings in the world. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world, so we've got them to thank. And they were highly intelligent people. They were very analytical, very mathematical. You know, their engineering skills was just phenomenal, right? Because to think that they designed these buildings, and if you look at the pyramid, the way each stone is laid, how they were able to get all those stones in place, how they were able to cut them, get them all to fit, place them all on top of one another, that's just ingenious, right? The other thing is they built ships. As we know, they would have had to build ships because they, you know, did a lot of their trade, a lot of their business on the Nile. So they needed a boat to go on the Nile to be able to go to various parts of the world to either buy or sell whatever they were producing. And guess what? They also invented the calendar. So the calendar as we have it today, we've got to thank the ancient Egyptians for the development of the calendar. And they were very mathematical, so it's no surprises that, you know, a lot of principles that we see in maths today, we can also thank the ancient Egyptians for. And they also developed the clocks. And there are just so many more things that the ancient Egyptians have developed that we, you know, have them to thank for. Here I'm going to give you an example of ancient Egyptian writing. What is the ancient Egyptian writing called? Hieroglyphics or hieroglyphs, okay? So the ancient Egyptians were among the first people to develop a system of writing. So the best known system, because the ancient Egyptians had like 3 other systems of writing, but the most popular one is known as the hieroglyphs or hieroglyphics, which, like I said before, is a mixture of images, also known as glyphs or symbols, okay? So here is an example of what a hieroglyph looks like. So that's a hieroglyph, right? So you see it's got images, yeah, and it's got symbols.
It looks like it's writing.
It's got symbols and it's got images. So what image is this? Let me just put my pointer on there. What image is this? No, it's a crocodile.
Crocodile.
What image is this? And what's this?
Man.
That's a person. What's this?
Bird.
What's that?
Bird.
And what's this?
Feather.
Very good.
Molly,
I don't know what these are. Does anyone know what these are?
No.
What's this?
Tangle. No.
What's that? That might be a wave or something. I don't know what this is. And what is this?
A man.
That looks like a king or a royal person, because you can see that this person is drawn differently from this one. This one looks like it might be a servant or something. Would you like to know what the hieroglyph means?
No.
Yes.
So here's what it means. The crocodile eats the king. The
All
crocodile
that,
eats the
just
king.
all that,
Yes.
Just
Well,
5 words.
yes. But remember that these carvings would have been very tiny anyway. This depicts a moment in Egyptian history where the king would have defeated his enemies. So when he's saying the crocodile eats the king, he's either saying that, you know, the danger or the threat that the king may have experienced has been overcome or he has won. So it doesn't mean that the crocodile physically eats the king. It could be either it physically eats the king that's the enemy of the pharaoh, or maybe there was some kind of fighting going on in the palace and, you know, that's no longer happening. So it could be that. So it's quiz time. Question 1. What is the famous river that flows through ancient Egypt? A. Amazon River. B. Nile River. C. Mississippi River. Question 2. What were the massive triangular structures built in ancient Egypt as tombs for pharaohs called? A. Palaces. B. Temples. C. Pyramids. Question 3. What ancient Egyptian writing system used pictures and symbols? A. Alphabet. B. Hieroglyphics. C. Cuneiform. Question 4. What was the process of preserving the bodies of the dead in ancient Egypt called? A. Cremation. B. Mummification. C. Burial. Question 5. What did ancient Egyptians call their leaders or rulers? A. Kings. B. Emperors. C. Pharaohs. 6. Who was the famous boy pharaoh known for his tomb filled with treasures, including a golden mask? A. King Tut. B. Ramesses II. C. Cleopatra.
Ramesses II.
Go and write your answer.
B.
7. What crops did the ancient Egyptians grow? A. Wheat, barley, papyrus. B. Tomatoes, pepper, onions. C. Potatoes, lettuce, carrots. Number 8. Which of these developments are attributed to the ancient Egyptians? Medicine, mummification, writing. B. iPhone, iPad, MacBook. C. Radio, TV, electricity. Question 9. What continent is ancient Egypt? A. Africa. B. Asia. C. Americas. Question 10. How many dynasties ruled in ancient Egypt before it became a Roman province in 1 BC? A. 12. B. 25. C. 30. All right, answers. So well done, guys.
Well done.
Well done.
For me to Michael
Grab some treats. Quickly grab some treats. Conclusion. So first of all, we see that ancient Egypt was a very, very long time ago, and it's very special because they built huge pyramids, okay? And that's the pyramid that we can see, and that's the Sphinx, yeah? And the pyramid is right up behind it.
Yeah, I know.
So the ancient Egyptians had a special way of writing, and they wrote with pictures, and as we saw in the example, with symbols as well. And, you know, thankfully, because of their writing, that's why we have writing today as we know it. And finally, the important thing about learning about ancient cultures is that we learn from them. We learn what their societies looked like. We learn about their engineering, their architecture, how they built their buildings. And this helps us to even be a better society. And thank you. Thank you, guys.